Good afternoon, everyone. My voice is a bit strange because I went for a party over the weekend and I'm just getting over it. So the question is, 2 glasses of milk a day, is this still relevant? There are lots of researches going on. Some has been concluded about the relevance of milk and what does dairy do. Thank you. What does dairy do? Does it have an effect and all? Of particular interest to us is this excellent paper that was published in 2013 by Prof. H.T. Dr. Weinhold et al. About having, the food-based dietary guideline for South Africa, about having milk, mass, or yogurt every day. I'd like for us to actually go and read, because it's actually a basis for my presentation today. Brief background of what it's in milk per 100 gram, and this was taken from the food composition table for South Africans, and we all know that milk is a nutrient-dense food. So other qualities of milk, apart from the nutrients in it, we talk about the bioactive peptides, specific fatty acids in milk, low sodium to potassium ratio. These are some of the things I'll be talking about today. Bioactive peptides are hydrolysates with specific amino acid sequences that exert a positive physiological influence on the body. Also, the peptides are released through hydrolysis by digestive enzymes, enzymatically by proteases, derived from microorganisms or plants, or food manufacturing processes. What are the activities of these dairy-based peptides? They could act as antihypertensive, I'll speak a bit more about that later, antimicrobial, anti-thrombotic, anti-gastric, immunodulatory, mineral binding, and osteoprotective. I think this is the part that a lot of us are familiar with. The specific fatty acids in milk. Milk fat is a complex natural fat which contains monounsaturated fatty acid as well as saturated fatty acid. It also contains short-chain fatty acid, butyric acids, and sphingolipids, which have possible beneficial effects against the risk of acquiring non-communicable diseases. These also additional fatty acids have been demonstrated to be anti-carcinogenic, anti-atherosclerotic, and may also play a role in the prevention of obesity. Milk contains a high potassium and relatively low sodium, which led to the phenomenon of a low sodium to potassium ratio, which is important in the prevention of hypertension and cardiovascular disease. According to Yang et al., a higher sodium-potassium ratio is associated with significantly increased risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. Also, Huggins et al. In 2011 published and said that a unit decrease in the sodium to potassium ratio was associated with a reduction in systolic blood pressure of 1.8 mmHg. Cook et al. Says a higher sodium to potassium excretion ratio is associated with increased risk of subsequent cardiovascular disease with an effect stronger than that of sodium or potassium alone. So, health benefits of milk. Some of these we're quite familiar with: the bone health, hypertension. Lots and lots of researchers are coming up these days to talk about the role of milk and dairy on hypertension, cardiovascular disease, overweight and obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. So I'll take them. For bone health, milk is one of the most concentrated sources of calcium, like we all know, which is needed for optimal gains in bone mass and density in the pre-puberty and adolescent years. Adequate calcium intake also prevents bone loss and osteoporotic fractures in the elderly. Increased dairy products significantly increase total body and lumbar spine bone mineral content in children with low baseline intake in a study carried out by Onkerel et al. In 2008. There is a moderate level of evidence, according to Karl Watts, indicating a relationship between childhood and adolescent milk intake and adult bone health. Meaning, not only when they're taking it when they're children and adolescents, it's also the protective effect still spills over to when they're adults as well. In growing children, long-term avoidance of cow milk is associated with small stature and poor bone health. According to the Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee for the Americans in 2010, said moderate evidence indicates that the intake of milk is linked to improved bone health in children. Greater intake of milk may lower risk for hip fracture in older adults through mechanisms that are partially but not entirely due to effects of bone mineral density. This was a study we carried out on postmenopausal women in the Northwest province, and it was published this year. Here, excuse me, because of our audience elsewhere, I won't use a pointer. I just want to note that. Okay. We could see here that we saw protective effect. We saw a positive relationship between femoral bone mineral density and dairy food intake of our postmenopausal women. We also saw for whole body bone mineral density, and there was a negative effects on fracture risk, meaning the higher the dairy intake, the lower the fracture risk for this group of women. Also, in our multiple regression analysis, we saw that dairy foods are actually predictors, we could call them predictors or contributors to femoral BMD positively and negatively to fracture risk. Low consumption of milk products was associated with a high incidence of hypertension in a study carried out by Mark Caron. The popular DASH diet by Apel et al. In 1997 used the approach of a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and low-fat dairy, and they concluded that it can substantially lower blood pressure, which we know it's true. And in 2013, Namachi spoke about this particular DASH diet that was done in 2000, that was only 1997, and it said that about 50% of the reduction in blood pressure associated with the DASH diet has been attributed to low-fat dairy. A meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies suggests that low-fat dairy and milk could contribute to the prevention of hypertension. These are the points also. Examination of newly published literature together with evaluation of the evidence as a whole shows that the majority of evidence indicates that dairy food are beneficially associated with blood pressure. As much as possible, what I did was to pull studies, meta-analyses, and reviews. Also, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee also states that there is a moderate strength of evidence for an inverse relationship between cardiovascular disease and dairy consumption in adults. Elwood et al. Did a systematic review and meta-analysis, and they stated the following points: that a reduction in risk associated with the highest level of milk consumption for myocardial infarction. They also stated that a reduction of about 10 to 15% in the incidence of ischemic heart disease and a 20% reduction in stroke events in the individuals who had reported drinking the most milk relative to those who drank the least milk within each cohort. They concluded that the data provides support for the beneficial effects of milk and dairy consumption on risk for cardiovascular disease. Namachi also said about that as well. For overweight and obesity, consumption of skimmed milk, in a study, two studies actually, consumption of skimmed milk in comparison with a fruit drink or cola leads to increased perception of satiety and decreased energy intake at the subsequent meal. However, this enhanced satiety did not translate into differences in continuous energy intake. So, evidence supporting the hypothesis of a relationship between milk intake and decreased body weight is not yet convincing. So lots of research, there is room for us to work on this and see if there is actually something about it. For metabolic syndrome, Elwood et al. Also, their data showed the reduction in the risk associated with the highest level of milk consumption for metabolic syndrome compared to the risk in those with low consumption. Also, intake of milk and milk products is associated with reduced risk of metabolic syndrome and may even be protective in certain population groups. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee for the Americas also states that there is moderate evidence that milk and milk products are associated with a lower incidence of type 2 diabetes in adults. Relative risk for type 2 diabetes was estimated to be 10% lower in people who had a high milk intake relative to those with low consumption. For cancer, we know different types of cancer has different etiologies. So I tried as much as possible, but there's still not that much research out there on milk and cancer, so I just pulled the few that I could see so far. Alvarez-Leon is also a meta-analysis. They reported an inverse association between dairy intake and colorectal cancer. They couldn't find evidence that dairy intake relates to breast cancer. They found some evidence that a high intake of dairy is associated with an incremental risk of prostate cancer. For gastric cancer, another study entirely, that's by Tian in 2014, they did the meta-analysis of longitudinal studies, and it showed no clear association between consumption of dairy products and gastric cancer risk. Common reasons why people avoid milk. I think throughout today, one or two things that actually come up about this. Milk allergies, particularly in children, and then children who are allergic to cow milk should not be given cow milk, at least till. It's my resolve later in life, until then they could be given rice or soy milk. Also lactose intolerance. We know quite a number of people are not really lactose intolerant, they are not lactose maldigesters. But even if they are lactose intolerant, they can consume 1 cup of milk without experiencing symptoms. Or they can consume their milk with meals. Or they can replace their milk with fermented milk or yogurt. Dental caries. Some people also believe that milk gives causes dental caries. We know that buffering capacity and protective active components present in food that contains lactose offer 210 ml protection from cariogenicity, according to Agutus in 2012. Also, some people believe because of the saturated fatty acid in milk, they shouldn't take milk. However, we know that milk has a protective effect on low-density lipoprotein cholesterol and high-density lipoprotein cholesterol, and also on blood pressure. Also, some people say there's trans fatty acid in milk, but there is inconclusive evidence that the trans fatty acid in milk is detrimental in the amount consumed with the recommended intake. So, if we put 2 glasses of milk in perspective, what do we get for children? 2 glasses of low-fat milk per day will provide them with 47 to 76% of their daily adequate intake of the recommended 800 to 1,300 milligram calcium, and for potassium, 16 to 25% of their RDA. For adults, it provides 50 to 61% for calcium and 16% for potassium. And also, it contributes a relatively low percentage of the maximum 2 grams sodium per day recommended for the prevention of high blood pressure. So, this is my question to us. After all being said and done, do we still think 2 glasses of milk a day is relevant? Thank you very much.